Welcome to this episode of Bias Hacking for Conversation Designers, the VOCLIME series exploring how different kinds of cognitive biases interact with the work of conversation designers and offering insights on how to mitigate them. Today, we'll be delving into so-called mere exposure effect. Starting from, what is the mere exposure effect? According to the Decision Lab's definition, the mere exposure effect describes our tendency to develop preferences for things simply because we're familiar with them. And that's why some also refer to it as the familiarity principle. An example of a situation where this effect might come into play is when we go to a restaurant serving a cuisine we're not familiar with. Naturally, the whole reason for going there would be to try out something new. But then when we read the menu and struggle to imagine how the different items might look and taste like, we might feel a little lost. So it might be that after some browsing, we do find a menu item that reminds us of a dish that we already know, or that has simply a more readable name, and we end up choosing that one just out of familiarity. So in my case, I'm Italian, and I might end up choosing dumplings over sushi just because it reminds me already of a dish that I know from my culture, so ravioli in this case. Now, this specific example might not have a huge impact on our lives, but the mere exposure effect can have a more significant impact on the work we do as designers. How does this actually affect conversation design? Let's bias hack this. Of course, a disclaimer is always due that we are not claiming to cure the incurable or fix the unfixable. Bias are part of us and will always be. What we're proposing here is more like a thought exercise than a prescriptive medicine to get rid of bias indefinitely. So let's see what are some ways that we can become aware of and deal with being exposure affected designers. First step is to create a neat boundary between the project or task you've just finished working on and the new one you're beginning to work on. Identifying patterns and learning from different experiences we accumulate is certainly great, but don't let yourself be too bound by the familiarity you've gained with a topic recently. This might prevent you actually from considering all the options you have and result in a not so fitting copy-pasting of procedures. This bleeds into the second tip, which is to use research to avoid applying your own frame of mind and help you explode your knowledge bubble. So allow yourself the time and space to retrieve all the information you need and make an informed decision. Finally, it's always a good idea to loop someone else into a complex decision. And if you can, why not make this someone who has a completely opposite perspective on the topic? As designers, we should also be aware of the ways the mere exposure effect can impact on our users. For example, CAI, chatbots, and voice bots could be a new technology to some of them, and they might feel like the restaurant guest that doesn't recognize any items on the menu, confused, insecure of their own ability, and doubtful of the technology. Figure out ways in which your design can contribute to build trust while managing the expectations of first-time users, or even more so of a CAI newbie. In this, it can be helpful to tap into the familiarity principle to gain user trust. Think skeuomorphic design. So try to sound natural when you can, evoke experiences that users are already familiar with in your domain, and consider ways in which the context in which your interfaces are integrated, for example, the GUI, can contribute to recall familiar experiences. Finally, don't underestimate the power of a simple metaphor in giving complex explanations. Recalling a familiar process through a visual example can be much more effective than a perfectly sensible yet strenuous definition with lots of dependent clauses and complex terms. These are just a few situations where the mere exposure effect can impact our work as conversation designers. Let us know if you can think of any other example, and in the meantime, check out our other videos of the series Bias Hacking for Conversation Designers. Bye, or should I say bias for now?